All right, so apparently I don't talk enough when I do these. So we're going to try doing a bit of talking this time. There's probably not a lot of talking to be done when I'm flying over open ocean because it's just a bunch of water. But I'll talk a little bit about my setup and what I'm doing here. So this flight that I'm on, if you haven't been reading or following, I've been flying in real time all the way across Canada from uh, west coast to the east coast. So I started about a year ago in BC on Victoria Island, and I've been doing it in real time in this little Cessna 152 that doesn't go very fast, uh, and not using any GPS. I can only use a map that I've downloaded and screen captured to put into the cockpit. I'm using VR. I'm using an HTC Vive. Um, and I have to look out the window and get my bearings. I can use some radio navigation, uh, if you know about this stuff, like VOR stations and stuff, like old timey stuff, I guess you'd call it now. Not as good as GPS, but I find it more fun to use. Um, I'm trying to keep it as real as possible, so I go through the startup checklist to the best of what I can do in a simulator. I do a walk around of my plane every time I go to take off. I have wheel chocks in. I have a cover on the pitot mast when I'm done. Um, and I try to do the boring stuff because I like the boring stuff. Um, I like flying slow old planes that remind me of old boats. So yeah, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through the process. Um, I'm probably going to pronounce it wrong. I'm currently parked at Ile de Madeliene, which is halfway between Prince Edward Island and Newfoundland, a little tiny island in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, which was supposed to be just a quick stop off to get fuel, but then we had to do some real life stuff, and I ran out of time. And by the time I could get back to it, it was raining. So the other thing I'm doing is I'm downloading actual weather from airports, and I should do that now. Uh, so we can actually see what the conditions are like. This is pulled, I think, every 25 minutes or 30 minutes, so it should be a pretty good representation. It gives me all the conditions that are there, the barometric pressure, the wind at different levels. If there was precipitation, I would have that too, but right now it's just some cumulus clouds. I'm also tracking real world time, so as I've been traveling from west to east, that's changed when I'm able to fly. So we should see some weather change up. There we go. Here come some clouds. Luckily, it's not raining. Um, so yeah, I'm going to take you through the startup procedure and show you how I do this. This particular plane I'm flying is a Cessna 152. Uh, the simulator model is made by a company named Carinado, and then there's an add-on, an aftermarket add-on that was free to make it even more realistic. By I think the name is Neridian is the username on the xplane.org forum. He took their model and with their permission turned it into a crazy realistic and functional uh, thing to do. There's fog on the windshield. There's so many different things. You can configure the airplane a million different ways. Have GPS, no GPS. Um, it's actually really cool. Even the big jets don't have this level of nuts and bolts ability to configure things. So I'm going to. This is also one of the only ones that I've seen that lets you actually do a proper walk around before you take off. Most planes are just a model, and they don't let you do anything to the outside. There's not a lot to be done, but this one lets you get right into the uh, nitty gritty of the boring parts of getting ready to fly. So I'm going to sit down in the plane. So this is the checklist that you can open up with this particular plane. So if you want to look for this plane and you're using X-Plane, Carinado C1522. That's the name of the add-on. the guy that did the add-on. It did a fantastic job. I wish more planes had this level of detail when you fly them. So you can see, looking at the dashboard of my plane or the instrument panel, I don't have any GPS set up in here. You can add a GPS. You can just open a box and check it off. But I'm doing this whole flight without it because I want to fly only using VFR rules, so visual flight rules, and looking out my window and looking at a river and seeing that I'm in the right spot. So we're going to go through the checklist. I'm not going to check everything off, even though I should. I'm in a simulator. I don't care that much. I care a little bit. So don't need to record the Hobbs time because it's not a real airplane. Removed the flight control lock just now. All the switches are off. Everything is stowed and ready to start off. So first thing that I'm going to do is turn on the battery. Now I actually have a switch panel in front of me. I'm going to do a video at some point, and I'll show you guys what I have for my controller setup. I've built my own desk to contain all my flight sim stuff because I fly in VR. I don't need a monitor in front of me. The monitor's strapped to my face, so I can try and make it feel like as much of an airplane as I can. So now that I've got the battery on, I'm going to put my flaps down, and we can see them coming down. I'm going to double check my fuel levels. That is where they were when I left them. We're going to have to add some fuel. And I'm going to turn off the battery so I don't kill it while I'm I just realized I've been talking for 5 minutes and haven't been pressing the button. So I just checked my flaps and my ailerons and my lights and the stall warning horn, taken off the wheel chocks and the pitot cover. Now I'm going to check my fuel, which I know is low, and I'm going to need some more. So this is another thing that most X-plane models don't let you do. They don't simulate it that intensely. But in this one, I can actually climb on top of the wing, put a fuel can in it, and set the amount of fuel I have. I'm not filling the tanks all the way because this isn't a very powerful airplane, and I've got my weight modeled in it. Uh, so my weight plus luggage, plus passenger, plus a full amount of fuel would be too much for the plane to actually fly. Um, so I've sort of calculated the right amount of fuel that I can go the furthest distance with what I have in the plane. I'm going to check that the propeller rotates freely. Then I'm going to check the landing light. So that's good. Go over here, open up this little hatch, check the oil. Now, I've never had it where there wasn't oil. I don't know that that even gets modeled. It's just a fun part of the step. Oh, fun for me. Most people probably wouldn't do that. Check the fuel, clear out the fuel sump, and then close it up. Now, if you wanted to, you could actually open this whole thing up and check the engine. Check the bat. You can recharge the battery, which I don't need to do right now. But they have like even inside the cowl, they have added details for the Lycoming engine and stuff like that, which is one of my favorite things about this plane. So now I'm going to check the fuel in the right wing, which is needing a top up. And we're all done there. So now, check the lights over here. And there we go, we've got lights. It's a little weird walking around in VR because I can only turn one way because I'm sitting in a chair. But in VR, I can walk anywhere. I just have to make sure I face the right way because there's a wall right behind me and I will hit it with my controller. Check my right aileron. Check my right flaps. The other thing that it lets you simulate, which is something that no other plane I think does, is you can check the quality of your fuel under the wing by draining off a little bit and looking for particles or water to be separating from it. That I've never had that happen in my sim, but it's something I check anyway. I'm going to check my elevators and my rudder. And while I'm back here, I can actually manipulate the controls. If there was someone in the front, I would just tell them to move the rudder. So I'm actually pushing rudder pedals with my feet right now. I'm pulling on the elevator control, and you can see the ailerons moving. And as I'm coming back, now that I've got fuel here, I will check that fuel and sit back in the plane. So we've done our walk around. We're all done. And we can go on to the next stuff. So we've done the pre-flight inspection. You're my passenger, so I'm doing a passenger briefing. Seatbelts are not real. Doors are closed. Parking brake is set. All the radios are off. Circuit breakers are all in. And the fuel shutoff valve is on. I apologize every now and then if, while I'm looking around, my point of view goes all squirrely. I've got 2 sensors in the room with me that are allowing me to use my VR equipment. And if they lose the line of sight to my headset, it'll freak out for a second, which takes some getting used to, but it works pretty well. So now we're going to get ready to start the engine. So mixture is going to be full rich. Carb heat is cold. We're going to prime. Throttle is going to be open 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch. Master switch on. Alternator switch on. Beacons and strobes are going to be on. Keys in ignition. Going to hold the brakes. Yell clear. I'm not going to yell clear because I'm the only one in the room. Going to switch the engine ignition. You can see the key moving here. I actually have a little real life switch that's like a key. And I'm going to start the engine. So now that the engine's started, I'm going to set the throttle to idle around 1100 RPM. Check my oil pressure. It is going up. Oil temperature is going up. The amp meter over here is indicating a slight charge. Generator's on, or alternator. Flaps are going to be put up. Because of the temperature, we are fogging up the windows, so I'm going to turn on some cabin air and maybe some heat. That should clear that up. So our fuel is now half a tank, whereas before it was just at 1/4. That should get us over the water. So now we're going to turn on our radios. And set our transponder to 1200. The transponder is what allows air traffic control, if you don't know, to distinguish us from other airplanes. This talks back to their radar station. And because I'm not going to be using air traffic control, I set it to a default value of 1200, so they know that there's an airplane there, but they don't have to talk to me. They don't have to deal with me at all. Heading indicator needs to match what the compass is, so it's set there. We're almost right. The nice thing about this model is you can just press the middle of the button and it'll set it for you rather than having to mess around. Because I've got a controller here, it hits it and I can't get it in there easily. I'm going to check our weather. So one of the only technological things that I'm using that wouldn't be in this original plane is this little heads-up display here. The air traffic radio isn't that great in X-Plane. In real life, you could just radio the airport and say, "What's the pressure? What's the what should I set my altimeter to?" And they could tell you, but you can't do that in this unless you're actually flying a flight plan. So this gives me some basic information that I need. Heading, which I can also just check here or here. Pressure is what I really want. So this tells me what I need to set my altimeter to, so it compensates for what the actual atmospheric pressure is, so my altitude reads correctly. So right now, it's 30.08 inches. So I'm going to just... And so now my altitude set. I'm actually at 0. I'm at sea level because we're on a tiny island in the middle of the water, so that makes sense. It tells me my outside air temperature, gives me the wind direction and speed, which is something I would also call in to ask or find out. So this allows me to compensate for the direction I'm trying to go and getting blown off course. And then it gives you some altitude information that I generally just use that for. All right, so the engine's started. Things are warming up. Double check that my controls are working. So the first thing I'm going to need to do, I'm going to put away the checklist for now. I'm going to get my chart out. So what I've done here is I've actually gone to a website called skyvector.com, which is essentially like Google Maps, but for aviation charts. And I've done a screen capture of the area that I'll be flying. So this is Prince Edward Island. Coming up here, this is Iles de la Madeliene, and this is the airport I'm currently at. I'm going to zoom in. It's going to take forever. So this gives me all the information I need for flying around here, specifically the radio navigation station. So it's 112.0, and I'm already set to that. So to go on to the next leg of my trip, I'm going to be following this line that I've plotted. And I'm going to be going to this tiny little airport here. There's no radio navigation here. If I didn't have this radio station I was at right now, I would have to do a lot of looking around for it. But because I have this, I know that if I follow this line out, I will be on the right track. So I need to set my navigation indicator to just under 100 degrees away. There we go. Okay, so as I start flying, this little needle, as long as I'm on course, this needle should be in the middle. If I go off course to the left, this needle is going to go right. If I go off course to the right, this needle is going to go left. So as I'm flying, as the wind blows me around, which is coming from 78 degrees, so the wind is coming, not 78 degrees, 78 degrees, yeah. So it's coming from just about east, so I'm kind of going to be flying into the wind, so it's not going to blow me off course too much. But I have to watch this and compensate and keep that. As long as I keep that in the middle, I will follow this line all the way to here, where I'm going to land, which is very handy when you're flying over water and you don't have any landmarks to work from. So being that the wind is coming from the east, I'm going to try to take off into the wind. So I try to avoid using this map for this project because it actually shows me where my airplane is, and I'm trying to only do navigation by visual cues. But when I'm on the ground, I need to know what the airport is I'm dealing with. So I'm going to take off from this runway, heading to the east. So you can see my rudder pedals moving there, and I have independent brakes as well, so I can twist my rudder pedal and control the brakes on each wheel. Just going to do a quick check to make sure that you can actually still hear what I'm saying. Yep. I'm going to turn my landing light on too. So one of the weird things that happens in smaller airports with the scenery that I'm using is that the runway information that it has doesn't exactly line up with where it is with Google Earth. So, for example, here it draws a runway just a little to the left of where the actual runway is on my scenery, which is a little trippy. When you get into bigger cities where they update the information more often, it's usually better. But in particularly rural areas, also this hill probably wouldn't be in the runway. That's concerning. Let's see what happens when I hit it. Yeah, that's not how things would work normally. So now that I'm getting into position for takeoff, I'm going to turn my plane into the wind. So I'm going to go to a heading of 74 degrees. Apparently I calculated wrong, and this is not taking off into the wind, but it doesn't matter because if I took off on that other runway, my landing gear would break off. So I'm almost into the wind here. This is probably fine. And I'm going to do my engine run up. Checklist. So we're facing the wind, nose wheel is centered, brakes are on, doors and windows closed and latched, elevator trim is set to take off, flight instruments are set, throttle is going to go to 1700 RPM. Gonna let it sit there for a minute. So now I'm going to use my ignition key and I'm going to turn off. I'm one magneto at a time. So, like the magnetic coils that produce a charge, there's two of them in case one fails. So I need to check that each of them are working properly. So what should happen is I should see an RPM drop of 125 RPM. So I'm going to turn off the left. And that looks about right. I'm going to switch it to the right. And it's about the same. I'm going to turn them both back on. Now I'm going to turn on carburetor heat, which should pull some of my RPM away. And it does very little, but it does some. And then mixture, check that the mixture control is working. We should just feel the engine kind of struggle for a second. Yeah, that did as it should. Suction gauge, which there's a vacuum pump that controls the altimeter, not the altimeter, the artificial horizon, and the gyroscopic instruments. So that's working properly. Ammeter is working properly. It's charging. And engine stuff is all within the green. So now I'm going to get lined up. Throttle friction isn't a thing I have in here. Seatbelts are not real. Doors and windows are closed and latched. Flaps, I'm going to actually use 10% of flaps. So just a bit. Carburetor heat is off. Transponder is set to alt. Landing light is on. Heading indicator is set. Flight controls are set. And X-Plane automatically logs everything. So I'm going to take off and lift the nose at 50 knots. So when this arrow gets to here, and then we'll take off. So once I'm climbing, I will be back. I mean, I'll still be here, but then I can talk. So that takeoff was a little bit windier than I wanted it to be. It almost blew me all the way sideways. I don't know how real that was. Plus, there was a big hill in that runway too. That was the first time I've ever seen that in this simulator, where there's like an actual difference in height of the different runways. I think it's probably because it's an out of the way airport and the modeling is kind of off, but I'm glad we were able to survive that because that was weird. So as you look around, or as I look around, again, I should apologize if I move my head too much. You're basically seeing exactly through my eyes, so it's like there's a camera strapped to my forehead for you guys. So the scenery that you're seeing is actually all pulled from Google Earth. I have a program that I'm going to take you through in another video once I'm all done this overall flight that allows me to select areas and pull the imagery off from the Google Earth server, and it formats it and it tags it and it lines it up geographically to where exactly it should be in most cases, um, and then pastes it over the text or the wire map of the world, which is also data that I pull from uh, other geological sites that have everything mapped out. It makes for super realistic scenery. You can see, like, I can literally fly over my house and see my house, which is pretty cool. There's also a website called OpenStreetMap, and it's similar to the Google Map or Bing Maps, but it's a completely open project. Anybody can sign in, kind of like Wikipedia, and become a contributor. You can add houses. Someone's been adding houses in my little town of Fingal, and mapping them out as to like what the dimensions are on the map. And then you can actually click on the buildings and see details about it. Like, I live in an old church, and if you click on my house, it actually says church, now a private residence. I didn't do that, but the information's there. So I have another utility that takes that OpenStreetMap data, including the buildings, and does its best to draw the buildings there, um, which on the ground it doesn't look exact, but when you're in the air and all the other ground scenery is correct, a building that's shaped like, I don't know, Masonville Mall in London exists, and I can fly over it, and it's there. Um, it does a really good job of uh, giving you landmarks to fly around and navigate by. The only downside is that the scenery is whatever the Google Earth scenery is. So if there was a cloud over uh, the area when they took a picture, they're getting better at clearing those out and updating the pictures. But um, it's going to be there on the ground when you're flying, so it'll be a big white blotch on the ground. Um, or if the pictures are from an older past where they like in a rural area or a wilderness area where they don't do a lot of updates, you'll see blotches like a patchwork of landscapes. From my opinion, it's still better than the out of the box scenery that X-Plane has, which um, it's not very good. It's horrible to navigate by. The nice thing also that gets put in with the OpenStreetMap stuff is it puts streets down with moving cars and streetlights on it. So when you're flying at night, you can actually see the roads, um, which is pretty handy. But you don't get any winter texture. So if you're flying in the middle of January in northern Ontario, the ground is going to be all green because but the weather is going to be cold. Like, it pulls the weather from the airport data, so there'll be snow falling, but the ground will all be green. It's kind of a trade-off, but I like the flexibility of being able to grab the scenery wherever I need. So what I've been doing is the data is huge. However, the Google Street View data or the Google Earth data, for the 4 tiles I needed for this leg of the flight, I think it was about 15 gigabytes. So as I've been flying across the country, I've been downloading tiles for my planned flight and deleting them when I'm done, just because it would take up way too much hard drive space. For southwestern and northern Ontario around Sudbury, where I fly a lot for fun, I keep that data on the hard drive because I always use it, and it's about 250 gigabytes. That's just the ground imagery, because I want to have higher def stuff for where I'm flying most often. But it's a very cool utility. It's not easy to use. There's once you learn it, it's pretty good. But it's there's a bit of a learning curve, and I'll try and take you through it in my if I get a chance to make a video for it, show you exactly what the process is. I'm going to stop talking for a while because I'm running out of things to say. But if I come up with something, I will talk again. Feel free to watch this or stop watching it. Uh, there's going to be a lot of that kind of scenery for this flight because I'm just crossing open water. Um, I'm going to try and level off. Actually, I'm going to level off now. 5,000 feet seems good. Turn off my landing light. I just realized I hadn't actually turned on my radio. There's a secret switch that my controller decides to involve in the whole situation, and it wasn't turned on. So I've been getting blown off course here for the entire time I've been flying. That's okay. I can get it back on. We're not too far out. So because I got blown north of the course I want to be going on. So the little white line there, the fact that it's pointing to the left, means that my course that I want to be on is about 100 degrees. Um, so I'm going left of that or north of that. I'm going 70 degrees, and that should you can see the needle slowly moving as I get closer to that line. So I'm going to try and stay level at 5,000 feet above sea level um, as I make this crossing. And we're going to have a headwind, so it's going to be a slow flight. I normally try and go about 90 knots, but we're going to be going slower than that as far as my real speed because the wind is blowing at us. So now that that arrow is lining up, I'm going to turn. Now that arrow is going to be really sensitive here, where I've just taken off from, because this is where the radio station is, the navigation radio. As I get further away, the different lines, so like between 90 and 120, and they're going to get further away from each other. So as I get further away from where I took off from and closer to my destination, it's going to take longer for those changes to show up. Whereas right now, like the slightest course deviation, and the arrow starts to move. So I don't want to chase it too much because that's going to be super annoying. I want to stay just sort of where that line can stay in the center dot. And then as I get out further away, it will get better. So I'm going to take One of the other benefits to being in a simulator is you get pretty good photo ops. So I'm just going to take a quick screenshot. And you might have seen those screenshots if you've been watching my Facebook. So you'll see right here that I'm almost 500 feet above where I want to be. Just having some challenges balancing everything with the headwind and my airspeed and getting everything on course. So once you level off, at least the way I've been flying it, I might be doing it wrong. I try and make my cruise airspeed around 85, 90 knots. And then I set my mixture knob, which is this guy. I basically just pull out the mixture, so I'm putting less gas into the mixture. So this is mixture full rich, so that's the maximum amount of gas I can put in. As I pull out, we'll see the RPM go up, and then it'll get to be too much or not enough, and then it'll go down again. So you want to be at the peak. I'm sure that's simplifying it. I'm sure there's someone out there that's like, you're all wrong, you don't know what you're talking about. And you are probably right. I probably don't know what I'm talking about exactly, but it's been working for me, and it's not real. So that because this is an airplane and we can't just pull over, this is essentially the same effect as a carburetor. It just allows you to adjust for different levels of air pressure. There's less air up high, so you need to adjust the balance of fuel to air going into the engine. And you have to do that manually in this plane. Some of the newer ones, like a DA62 by Diamond, controls that automatically, like with its own flight computer. And probably even the new Cessnas and things like that probably have very little need to control that. But this is an older one, and I like the more hands-on stuff. So now I've gotten blown to the other side of my course. So once I get my altitude situation sorted out, so we're now back down to 5,000 feet. So I'm using, to control my airspeed, I'm using this knob right here. That's your trim knob. And what that does is it changes a little tab on the back on the elevator to force it to go up and down. So that affects what direction you're pointing, up or down. If you're pointing up, your airspeed will decrease, and if you're pointing down, your airspeed will go up. It's like going uphill or downhill. So you use that to set your airspeed, or at least I do. And then once you are sort of where you want that, the airspeed is going to try and stay constant. The plane is going to adjust automatically as it flies through the air to try and keep that airspeed. So you use the engine throttle or the power to compensate for how much lift you're generating. So I'm generating too much, so I'm going to pull back. I should end up around 2100 RPM, which is kind of where I am. I'm just going to need to do some fine tuning to get it right there. It's going to go up and down. It's going to fluctuate, but that's where it's at, or we want it to be. Going to adjust my course here. So one of my favorite things about this flight model, or this airplane model, this Cessna 152, the guy that did the add-on for it modeled in an old-timey flight computer that actually works. So before GPS and apps on your cell phone that would do this for you, you would have to manually calculate to compensate for wind if you didn't want to be constantly um, going off course and trying to turn back into it. So what you do is you set this ring for whatever the wind direction is. So wind direction is 92. So almost directly from the east. And I have to constantly be going back because I'm hand flying. There's no autopilot in this plane. I have to constantly go back and fly the airplane. If there was someone else with me, I could just get them to hold the stick level so that it doesn't go all over the place. But there's no one here, so it's just me. So I've set my wind direction. Wind speed is 30 knots. So this is where it gets tricky. This add-on doesn't really have a good way to do it in VR. It's a little bit of a things don't like I can't just drag this dot up. I have to kind of figure out which way to twist it. So 10, 20, so 30 knots above what? Come on, go over this way. So like if I move down, it moves left. There we go. 10, 20. So I'm not actually putting this dot at where it says 30. I'm just putting it 30 above where I was. And I looked away for a second, and the plane is doing its own thing. This is going to take us so long. We're going really slow. So basically, my airspeed is 85, 90 knots, minus 30, because I'm flying into a 30 knot headwind. But I'm tired of waiting for the weather to be perfect for this flight, so I'm just going to go for it. Hope that I have enough fuel to make it all the way. So I've set that. This is 10, 20, 30 knots above my center point, which indicates a 30 knot wind. Now I set this to be what the course is that I want, which is that. So I don't really need to adjust my course too much. So when you finish setting everything, in real life, you would actually, this would be clear, and you would just like use a grease pencil or something and draw that line up. And then when you turn it, like, so let's say my course, I wanted to go south. I would turn this south. So if these were the wind conditions and I wanted to go south and be like stay on the same course, I would have to turn almost 25 degrees to the left of south in order to stay on course, because that's how hard the wind is going to be blowing me back to the west. But luckily, we're just going into the headwind, so it's just going to slow us down by 30 knots. Yeah, so that's that. And if I bring I think we might actually be getting blown backwards. So my true airspeed line is going to be 85. So I'm only going 50 knots. So we're not actually getting blown backwards, but it's not much better. So it looks like we finally flew out of visual range of the island we took off from. So my guess would be it'd probably be about here. Not very far, considering we have to go to here. I hope we can make it. Don't accidentally hit the controls when you're moving around the cockpit. Well, if you look way far in the distance, you can just see the silhouette of land starting to show up. So I think we should be okay for fuel. And the runway I'm looking for is almost right on the beach, so we're almost there. So I have a feeling that this is going to be a very bumpy landing. It's very windy. You can see the runway over there, and it's exactly crosswind. So wind is coming in from the east, and the runway runs north-south. So, and the wind right now is 30 knots, which is very tricky. Hopefully it gets lower as I get closer to the ground, but I'm not holding out much hope for that. I'm going to get lined up as best I can, and hopefully I hit the runway. This is a runway, when you see it, that you'll see what I was talking about earlier. The texture doesn't draw properly. So the runway is like 30 feet to the left of the picture of the runway that's on the texture for the ground. So it's a little bit disorienting. I have to make sure I pick the right one. Otherwise, I'm not actually landing on the runway. It's one of the downsides of doing the scenery like this. Well, that was probably one of the craziest landings I think I've ever done. So also, this airport doesn't seem to have a parking area added in, so I'm just going to park it on this taxiway. It's kind of a miracle I actually found it because I didn't realize that I would lose my navigation radio. Luckily, the wind was directly ahead of me. Otherwise, I would have gotten blown off course. I would have no idea. Anyway, we're landed. We're in Newfoundland finally. Uh, and yeah, next leg is going to take us along the south shore of Newfoundland and then go up to St. John's, and then we'll be done. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you're still watching, I'm probably not going to do any more today. Uh, but yeah, here we are. I'm going to shut this down and disconnect. Have a good one.